Have you heard the phrase, the science isn't finished until it's communicated? It's quite commonly used in the science communication space to emphasise that research and knowledge should be shared and accessible. My name is Jessica Stokes-Parish, and today I'm going to share with you how to leverage social media strategically for your academic practice. In this short video, we'll explore how to apply social media in academic land, a brief overview of platforms, and strategies for your well-being and online safety. But before we can go any further, let's define social media. Social media can be defined as a range of technologies that allow web-based and mobile applications to connect, create, and engage user-generated content between individuals and organisations. But why social media? I alluded to dissemination at the beginning of the presentation, but for many, social media practice is much more than dissemination. It's an opportunity to connect with colleagues, learn from others, boost citations, and engage in dialogue. For me, it's that latter one. Instead of simply disseminating my work, I'm actively engaging in conversations about my work, which is a much richer experience. When applying social media in academic practice, I draw from a framework published in The Role of Social Media in Health Professions Education by Professor Victoria Brazel, Jessie Spur, and myself. This work frames the use of social media in three categories: consumption, curation, and creation. So let's talk about a few examples of these. Consumption is simply that. It's consuming social media content. For some, that's observing content and Twitter threads. For others, it's viewing YouTube videos that explain anatomical concepts like this one here. Curation is a crafted skill in which you as a user might bring together different threads of information into one location to make it easier for the viewer. And then finally, creation, where you're generating new content like my profile here, in which I post new information, disseminate research and other topics. So how do you use social media? Is your practice mostly consumption, curation, or creation? When it comes to considering how you might like to use social media, I recommend considering these four things: your resources, the needs, critical appraisal, and analytics. So what resources do you have available? Do you have the access to equipment? Do you have the skills to manage that equipment? What are the needs of your social media strategy? Can your resources map to those needs? And what will your strategy before critical appraisal be? That is, how will you critically appraise the content you both consume and create? And how will you evaluate your social media use? To support you with exploring these questions, I've curated a number of resources that you can download from this QR code. You might like to pause here and explore those before progressing further. Okay, so now you've got your general idea set. Which platform will you use? There are many platforms available, a very small selection as displayed here. So it's good to explore which ones suit your goals and needs, and we'll go through a quick overview. Facebook still has the most amount of users, with the most common age group 24 to 34-year-olds. This is also where you'll find the older demographics more so than the other platforms. Instagram follows very closely behind, but with a broader spread of ages of 18 to 34-year-olds. TikTok, one of the newer platforms, while it only has 1 billion active users, the largest age group is under 20. And look at that time spent per day, 90 minutes. What's similar across Instagram and TikTok is that these platforms heavily influence product purchases and choices of the demographic that view these platforms. Now, some of the platforms you may be more traditionally familiar with in academia are LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. YouTube has the highest reach and continues to expand despite its age. It's the go-to platform for streaming. LinkedIn is not a daily use type platform and very much is business to business selling. Twitter, important to note, is very heavy on the news content and has a high amount of educated and wealthy people that are users. So there are obviously more platforms that you could explore, but hearing this information, you might take a moment to pause and think, which of these platforms best meets my goals? Now, before you go about using social media, there are some important considerations for your practice, including your ethical and legal obligations. If you're a health professional, you should know that there are very tight national laws about how you use social media, particularly when it comes to products or recommendations about health decisions. If you work for a public health organisation, you'll find that their current policies are incredibly restrictive. If you work in academia, however, things are a little bit looser, but there are some considerations about ethical practice. For example, how will your presence on social media damage or enhance their organisational reputation? You can read more about these things in the resources that are provided through the QR code. Now, with social media use, what about your mental well-being or your well-being in general? Social media can be a challenging space. How will you manage your mental health? It can be isolating to use social media, and you can get sucked into the vortex of feeling that it's another time or space or place. It's important to remember that while social media is useful, it is not the real world. In terms of physical health, there are real risks associated with social media use, such as eye strain and muscle strain from repetitive movements. So keep these in mind when you are using social media. And finally, the dangers of social media that we don't often talk about include theft of intellectual property, harassment, and other cybersecurity issues. You need to consider these in the context of the content you might be sharing. Does the content you discuss touch hot topics, and could it put you at risk to these issues? It's really important that you think about how you're going to manage these issues as you use social media practice. Thanks for joining me to talk about how you can leverage social media in your academic practice. If you'd like more resources or to explore this issue in more depth, I encourage you to download some of the resources that are on this QR code. And if you'd like to talk to me about this further, feel free to contact me at jstokesp@bond.edu.au.